I would say that they should pick the one book that they should read. That I would suggest go and find one book of poetry that they absolutely love. And I would say every English major should have a book of poems, or maybe even just one poem that they love more than anything else, because that's really where language shows how beautiful it can be. I mean, whether it's Leaves of Grass, or it's Frost North of Boston, or what's Lucille Clifton's Quilting, or Sylvia Plath's Ariel, just pick a book of poems and fall in love with it. The challenging thing about teaching college students, I think that it would be how many demands they have on their time. And what is most important to me is to have every student find their original voice and really find their passion for learning. And that is really hard to do when tuition keeps rising and you have so many jobs to do, and you have to worry about what you're going to do over the summer and after graduation, and convincing people why you should follow your passions and your interests instead of doing what they want you to do. I think that's really challenging, to sort of respect the constraints on them at the same time as trying to create an environment where they can follow what most excites them. My research path? Well, that's interesting. I went to graduate school to study post-colonial African Anglophone fiction, and I ended up really falling in love with early American literature, which seems very far away from that, so colonial America. But in undergrad, I had double majored in English and history, and I could never quite figure out which discipline I loved more. And so I decided to think about post-colonial topics and issues of race and empire in a context that was very historically different from mine. So it was sort of the perfect constellation of these types of colonial questions and sort of satisfying that idea of being a historical detective. I definitely probably would have stayed at the PBS NewsHour. I was working there before I went to grad school, when it was still called the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer, and I worked as a production assistant covering Capitol Hill, and I loved figuring out how to tell stories through visual images. And that was something that I had never thought about, before I had gotten to college. What are the different media in which we can tell stories? And it was really fun. And it's a hard job to go on and continue doing that, to have a daily deadline. They still put the show on, and now it's with Gwen Ifill and Judy Woodruff, and it's fantastic. But it's a very different sort of deadline environment than being an English professor. We have a lot longer time to produce a work, but I love the idea of telling stories with images and visually, and trying to figure out how to make things that are really not interesting visually, like Congress, appealing for television. I mean, I would definitely like to read 500 pages if it was like Middlemarch. It depends on what I was reading. I miss just kind of being able to sort of have that flowing experience with reading, sort of reading with abandon, and not necessarily needing to figure out what to say about it afterwards. But also, it's really satisfying to write 20 pages if you like what you wrote. So. I stood on a corner in Winslow, Arizona, and there were not a lot of sights to see. So I don't think I need to go back there. Oh, definitely. The best thing about Ohio State University is the fact that it's a public land-grant university. And so in my classes, I have all different kinds of students. students from all over the world, from different class backgrounds, religious backgrounds, totally different interests, and they all come together to discuss the same text. And I think it's a fantastic democratic experiment to have a public university where all these different types of people get to deliberate respectfully on what it means to them. And that's the best part about teaching at Ohio State.